Welcome to episode 5. We move from the glorious potential of the high mountain back into the psychological shadows of the valley. In Isaiah chapter 2, verses 6 through 22, the prophet exposes why the human ego resists the light and builds idols out of wealth, technology, and military power. He also reveals why the day of the Lord is not merely a dramatic event, but a moral and spiritual reset, an unveiling that humbles everything out of alignment. Before we begin, a clear disclaimer. This presentation is a metaphysical and psychological inquiry that uses certain concepts associated with the Seth Speaks material by Jane Roberts as a conceptual lens. It is not a replacement for scripture, doctrine, or personal faith. The Bible is honored here as sacred text. Our purpose is educational and philosophical, to examine how prophetic experience may operate through awareness, symbolism, moral perception, and the structure of human meaning. Isaiah begins with a painful observation. The people have forsaken their own center. He describes them as filled with foreign customs, fascinated by soothsaying, and pleased with imported ways of thinking. The point is not simple cultural curiosity. The prophet is describing spiritual displacement. The people are replacing trust in God with techniques of control. They are seeking power without alignment, outcomes without obedience, benefits without covenant. In theological terms, this is idolatry in its early stage. The heart turns away from God and begins to treat knowledge, prediction, and manipulation as substitutes for faith. In psychological terms, it is the anxiety response of the ego. When the inner life loses trust, it looks for shortcuts. When conscience becomes quiet, the mind becomes loud. It grabs at methods, trends, and external assurances because it is no longer anchored in what is true. If we borrow Sethian metaphors carefully, we could say the beam of attention has detached from its source and now scans the camouflage world for replacement light. It wants certainty without surrender. It wants control without holiness. But the prophet's warning is that external magic cannot heal internal disorder. Noise cannot restore integrity. And a mind filled with competing influences becomes a mind that cannot hear. Isaiah then describes a land full of silver and gold, without end to treasure, full of horses and chariots, and full of idols worshipping the work of their own hands. The progression is important. Wealth becomes abundance. Abundance becomes security. And security becomes a god. Technology becomes speed. Speed becomes dominance. And dominance becomes a god. Military strength becomes protection. Protection becomes pride. And pride becomes a god. The people do not merely own these things. They trust them. They bow inwardly, even if they stand outwardly. Here is the prophet's sharp insight. An idol is not only a statue. An idol is anything you treat as ultimate. Anything you trust more than God. Anything you obey faster than truth. Anything you fear losing more than you fear losing integrity. In that sense, an idol can be a bank account, an army, a machine, a reputation, a party, a nation, or even an idea you refuse to surrender. Psychologically, idolatry is projection. Human beings take qualities that belong to the inner life, meaning, power, safety, value, and project them onto external objects. Then the objects begin to rule the person. The person becomes anxious without them, empty without them, and willing to compromise for them. The prophet's phrase, "the work of their own hands," is devastating because it exposes the irony. They are worshipping what they made, forgetting the one who made them. Isaiah then says that people bow down. Each lowers himself. The text adds a severe phrase about forgiveness, which can sound harsh if we read it as mere temper. But Isaiah's point is not that God enjoys withholding mercy. The point is that a person cannot cling to idolatry and simultaneously receive the healing of repentance. Forgiveness is not a magic word that leaves the heart unchanged. Forgiveness restores relationship, and relationship requires turning. In other words, there is a moral consequence in lowering yourself to what is less than God. When you worship objects, you shrink your own awareness. You train your attention downward. You become dependent on what cannot carry the weight of the soul. And over time, the inner life becomes rigid, like the idols themselves, cold, fixed, and unresponsive to truth. Then Isaiah describes the most haunting behavior of all, hiding. He tells people to enter into the rock and hide in the dust from the terror of the Lord and from the glory of his majesty. He declares that lofty human looks will be humbled. This is the language of the day of the Lord. In traditional theology, it is a day of judgment, but judgment here is not merely God getting angry. It is God revealing what is real. It is the glory of God exposing what has been false. Light does not need to argue with darkness. It simply shows what is there. And when a life has been built on illusion, exposure feels like terror, not because truth is evil, but because the ego is threatened by truth. Here is a careful metaphor. Imagine a room filled with fog. The fog has made itself feel like the atmosphere. It has convinced the room that this is normal. Then a strong light enters. The fog does not fight the light. It dissolves. But to the fog, the light feels like destruction because it ends the fog's identity. In a similar way, the ego can become attached to its own false foundations. When God's holiness draws near, the ego experiences the collapse of its illusions as humiliation and fear. That is why the prophet describes people running into caves. They would rather hide than be changed. Isaiah then lists the high things that will be brought low. Proud people, cedars and oaks, high mountains, lofty hills, towers, fortified walls, ships, and all that is beautiful and impressive. The list is symbolic and comprehensive. It is nature's pride, architecture's pride, commerce's pride, military pride, and human pride. All the structures that say, we are high, we are secure, we are untouchable. The prophet's message is not anti-progress, it is anti-pride. The issue is not that towers exist or ships exist. The issue is the spirit behind them. The belief that human greatness can replace God. The belief that security can be manufactured without righteousness. The belief that the center can be anything other than the Lord. In systems language, we could call this a correction of imbalance. When a society builds itself on arrogance and injustice, it creates instability. The higher it lifts itself on false foundations, the harder it falls when reality asserts itself. Isaiah calls it the day of the Lord, because the reset is not merely political, it is moral, it is spiritual. It is the world returning to the truth that God is God, and humans are not. Isaiah repeats the conclusion with force. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day, and idols will pass away. That line is not about God needing applause. It is about reality becoming unavoidable. When everything artificial collapses, what remains is the ultimate. When every substitute fails, the true center becomes visible again. Then Isaiah describes the final humiliation. People will cast away their idols of silver and gold. They will throw them aside as useless, and they will flee into the clefts of the rocks. The picture is total disillusionment. The things they worshipped cannot save them. Their treasures cannot protect them from truth. Their weapons cannot defend them from exposure. Their status cannot hide their emptiness. The idol is revealed as powerless, and the ego is revealed as fragile. Isaiah ends with a warning that is deeply psychological and profoundly spiritual. Stop trusting in man, whose breath is in his nostrils. The prophet is not teaching contempt for human life. He is teaching proportion. Humans are mortal, leaders are limited, empires end, bodies fail. If you anchor your identity in what is temporary, you will be shaken when it collapses. If you worship human power, you will be devastated when human power proves weak. The call is to anchor the soul in the eternal. In biblical language, that means fearing God rather than fearing man, trusting God rather than trusting idols, and building life on righteousness rather than on self-made security. In metaphysical language as metaphor, it means remembering your origin rather than worshipping your mask. So what have we learned in Isaiah 2, verses 6 through 22? First, idolatry begins as anxiety. When the heart loses trust in God, it searches for control through external substitutes. Second, idols are projections. Humans give their inner power to objects and then become ruled by what they made. Third, pride creates blindness. The ego builds high towers to escape its own insecurity, but those towers cannot withstand truth. Fourth, the day of the Lord is an unveiling. It is the light of God exposing false foundations. It feels like terror only to what is committed to illusion. Fifth, when substitutes collapse, reality returns. The Lord alone is exalted not because God needed victory, but because truth cannot be permanently hidden. And finally, do not anchor your soul in breath alone. Do not build your identity on what can vanish. Anchor in the eternal. As we close, ask yourself this: what is your idol today? What do you trust the most when you are afraid? What do you obey the fastest when it demands compromise? What do you protect even at the cost of integrity? Because whatever that is, Isaiah would call it a false mountain, and the day of the Lord in one way or another brings false mountains down. In the next episode, we enter Isaiah chapter 3, where the prophet describes what happens when the supports of society are removed and the scaffolding collapses. We will explore the chaos of the ego when leadership fails and instability spreads. If this series helps you regain your center, support the work. Like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and stop trusting in the man of breath. Anchor in the eternal. Find your beam.